Hi, everyone. Welcome to Emerald Live, our educational series. So glad to have you here. Happy Pride. Today's the last day of Pride Month, but here at Emerald Live, we celebrate 365 days a year of LGBTQIA and Pride. Love is love. Emerald Live is a proud supporter of BIPOC and LGBTQIA and all communities affected by systemic issues that cause inequality. We stand in solidarity with protesters and all who suffer from and fight against racism, oppression, and police brutality. We partner with various charities and lawmakers to end cannabis prohibition, push for decriminalization, and bring about social equity. Emerald Live will continue to use its platform to amplify the voices of those underserved. I'm Jill Cohen. I'm the Managing Director of Emerald Live. This is the webinar division of Emerald Media Group. Please be sure to follow us on our social media pages. Joe will post them in our chat room now. A quick shout out to our partners. A huge thanks to Last Prisoners Project, Tribe Tokes, and Cannabis Voters Project. Today we'll be discussing LGBTQIA experiences, challenges, and accomplishments in the cannabis industry. But before we get started, a quick clip on industry news from the weekly show with Mike Haze. Mike began his cannabis career in 2015, designing software for companies like MJ Freeway and LeafLink. He then began building communities in Colorado cannabis, running events where he interviewed everyone from the CEO of Wana Brands to the congressman who wrote the Safe Banking Act. With live events on pause, Mike has brought his interviews and industry news updates to the web. Follow him on Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube, and Joe will also be posting that in the chat room as well. So now I'd like to turn it over to Mike Haze. Thank you, Mike.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for the introduction. And thanks to Emerald Live for having me as part of this event. Happy Pride to everyone. So I do my best in my videos to be a combo of informative and entertaining. So let's get to the news. The biggest cannabis news story this week is actually out of Washington, D.C. A whistleblower last week told Congress that Attorney General Bill Barr had inappropriately ordered antitrust investigations into cannabis industry mergers. Barr did this even after his own experts assured him that no cannabis companies were close to winning monopoly. Most were still trying to find the cards for pass go, collect $200, and even get out of jail free. Now, going over to the reasonable side of DC, Senator Cory Booker said in a virtual town hall meeting this month that he and Bernie Sanders have, quote, consistent conversations regarding cannabis justice. Consistent conversations, eh, Cory? We get it. You and Sanders are burning one down on the regular. Love it. Please continue. Senator Booker said, I'm all for legalization, but to say that and not to include expunging records and reinvesting profits into communities that have been economically devastated by the drug war, you're not talking about justice. Very important points from Senator Booker, and so we have two updates on this very topic. First, Colorado passed, embarrassingly, our very first social equity program last week, and the governor visited Simply Pure, the first Black-owned dispensary in America, to sign it into law. Meanwhile, in LA, activists are skeptical as the city council tries to kick their social equity program into action after 3+ years without a single license issued. Apparently, the city's rallying cry has been, if not us, then who? And if not now, how about in 3 more years? Also, maybe it wouldn't have to be us by then. Now, moving back to the East Coast, stats are coming in from the first week of adult use dispensaries reopening in Massachusetts, and sales are significantly lower than they were pre-COVID. The article I read said that was probably due to basically no tourists and no out-of-state travel, which was a relief because at first I was afraid Massachusetts had just collectively decided, forget cannabis, we're done with it, we're staying angry. I'm from Philadelphia, so I know all about angry as a beloved culture. Now, last in our list, we touch on the corporate side of our industry. Acreage Holdings reportedly lost 2/3 of their value this week after taking a $15 million loan at a 60% interest rate. 60%? I haven't seen that kind of an outrageous markup since my college roommate was selling dime bags to all the trust fund kids. But wait a second, who's on the board of directors at Acreage Holdings? I always did wonder what happened to those kids. Anyway, that's the cannabis news of the week. If you enjoyed it, please look me up on Instagram or YouTube or Twitter. I'm under Mike Haze with a Z_CO. Back to Emerald Live. Happy Pride, everyone. Thanks for letting me do my silly thing.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. That was wonderful. Appreciate it. Now I'd like to introduce you to Christina de Giovanni, CEO of Emerald Media Group, who will introduce our wonderful panel and get the conversation started.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Jill. I hope is my camera working all right on your end? Okay, great, because I'm looking at your beautiful face. So thank you so much for everyone for joining us today. On June 30th, we are here to celebrate Pride. We're here to celebrate the LGBTQ community, and we want to thank you all for being a part of it and for joining us today. We have two great panelists with us. We have Katie Stem. She's the co-founder of Peak Extracts Chocolate based out of Oregon. And we have Mary Jane Gibson, writer, actress, and host at Weed and Grub. Thank you both so much for joining us. I would love to start the conversation off by having you tell the audience just a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your company, and how you came into cannabis. Katie, would you like to kick that off?
Sure. So I moved to Portland in 2005 and I got my medical card to treat my Crohn's disease. And I started networking here and growing my own, and I started making strain specific chocolates because I noticed that some strains were working really well for my Crohn's and others weren't. And so I became a chocolatier and I started the company with my partner Kate in 2014. And since then we were the first recreational license in Oregon for edibles. And we've been making chocolates, topicals, vape pens, tinctures, etc.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Mary Jane, we'd love to hear from you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me. I came to cannabis when I started writing for High Times. I met the whole gang at High Times in 2003 or 4, and I started writing for them in 2007. And then I took a full-time editorial position in what ultimately became the culture editor position in 2014. I left High Times in 2018, and now I write about cannabis for Rolling Stone and other outlets. And I host Weed and Grub, which is a podcast about the cornerstones for everything, cannabis and food, with my co-host Mike Glazer. And we actually met Kate and Katie when we passed through Portland last year and had them on the podcast.
Oh, that's awesome. I love how cannabis is such a close community, and you're able to do that, cross paths with people and then work with them later on down the road. One of the first things I'd like to start this panel off with is, what are some of the parallels between cannabis, the cannabis movement, and the LGBTQ movement? We know that both have a history of overcoming an extreme amount of issues, a history that is not the most positive, in regards to equality. So what would you two speak on? And Mary, I'll just let you touch up on this since we had you on last, but what are some of the parallels between the cannabis movement and the LGBT movement, in your opinion?
Well, I've been writing about cannabis for a long time, and it's been an education for me about the LGBTQ community, which I cover and am an ally of, obviously. So I was really amazed to learn the history of marijuana legalization in the United States and how it's completely entwined with the LGBTQ movement and the relationship between the prohibition of marijuana and the lack of civil liberties for queer communities is parallel. The marijuana movement really came about in the 80s during the AIDS epidemic, when Dennis Perone was one of the first people to open a medical marijuana dispensary after he lost his significant other to AIDS, and he wanted to find relief for his community through cannabis when nothing was being done to help the community through the crisis. And so, they're completely intertwined. And I think that the cannabis industry is a very welcoming environment, and it's a very inclusive space in a lot of ways, but there's a difference between inclusivity and representation. And I think what we're facing right now is a time where we don't have enough representation, not only of LGBTQ leaders, but also people of color and women in the industry. And that's something that I'm really interested in highlighting so that we can all work to change it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Katie, what are your thoughts on the parallels between both the cannabis movement and the LGBTQ movement?
I agree completely with what Mary Jane said. I also think that there's just been a lot of metaphorical parallels between the stigma of each and it becoming sort of a moral issue for people, but it was mostly based on ignorance where, for instance, my parents, I had to come out as both queer and as a cannabis user to them. And in both, they thought it was something really marginalized. And once they began to know people that both consumed cannabis and were queer, they started to accept it more, and it became more acceptable, right? And so I think it's about education, and it's about familiarity and bringing it into a mainstream audience and convincing them that it's not such a big deal and it won't ruin your life either way, because that's where most people are concerned, is that cannabis is going to ruin your life and being queer is going to ruin your life somehow, at least parents.
Yeah, no longer are the days of the devil's lettuce, and still a Schedule 1. You know, on that note, you know, when I first got caught consuming cannabis, my mother cried, you know, and she was like, what did I do wrong? This is like heroin, you know, and there was a long amount of learning that had to take place in between then and now. And kind of touching on what Mary Jane had said about Dennis Perrone, I've met Dennis. A lot of people in the industry are familiar with who he is. You know, that man is a hero to me. What he did out of his garage to provide patients with relief is epic, because you know, he was willing to go to jail and be public and help people with AIDS and HIV, you know, help the LGBTQ community, help the cannabis movement. You know, he's certainly a hero of mine. And for those that might know him a little closer, he used to run this amazing Airbnb in the Castro, and I stayed there, and it was just as wonderful and as epic as you could ever imagine. So, you know, on that note, what advice would you both give to women and entrepreneurs that are in the LGBTQ community that are starting out in the industry? If you could almost, you know, go back in time to maybe when you were starting in the industry, what would be some of the better advice you could give yourself and you could give other entrepreneurs entering the industry?
I would just say one of the coolest things about this industry is that we're getting to define what it looks like. So instead of fighting each other for a seat at the table, we are building the table, and we get to design our own chairs, and we get to pull as many of those chairs up to the table as we want to continue the metaphor. But it's really exciting because, you know, I grew up in the 70s and 80s with a promise that as a woman, the world could be mine. You know, Sigourney Weaver was leading box office hits, and there was just this very exciting time, and my parents really raised me to believe that I could do anything. And then something happened, and this weird backlash took over, and all of a sudden in the 90s and the aughts, there was this weird fight to sort of fight for your voice. And I think that when I came to cannabis and then really started covering the intersection of cannabis with marginalized communities, I realized what was so exciting about it was that cannabis has, you know, opens the door, because the people who love cannabis are already committed to championing something that is marginal and othered. And especially when it intersects with a community that has a marginalized presence or voice, you're already a badass and you're already a renegade. So why not, you know, just take it all in stride, you know, pull up your chair to that table and define what you want it to look like. You know, it's a really thrilling time where you can say whatever it is that you want to do and build that job for yourself. Your position might not exist in the industry, but you might have the opportunity, when you partner with the right people and you meet your person or people, to build whatever you want it to look like. So I'd say there's no roadmap. It's just, you need to be incredibly disciplined and incredibly resilient, and you're gonna get knocked down a bunch, and you just have to be like what were those toys, the Weeble Wobbles? I mean, you're gonna get battered around, but you just need to keep getting back up, which I think everyone in those communities is already used to. You're used to hard knocks, so.
Absolutely. And I agree, you know, this industry is, you know, what you make of it, you know, bring your own chair, BYOC, and bring your own cannabis. Yeah. It's kind of like a canvas, you know, and you're able to paint the picture or paint the path that you want to go on it, and, you know, hopefully work with others in creating this masterpiece. And so, Katie, I'd like to extend that question to you. You know, what are your thoughts? Sorry.
I think that it's key to find mentorship. I think that one of the major problems with access for women, people of color, LGBTQIA, is just that they aren't getting the visibility and the mentorship that other people tend to get. And so to seek out people who are willing to mentor you and to share some secrets and to get you some of those roadmaps and you know, tricks of the trade And there's a lot of people in the industry who went through the same thing and were very communicative and very excited to share our knowledge. And we've seen, or at least I've seen, many white male people have mentors that help them through some of these big barriers. And so I want to pay that forward to other people that can come and join the table. And so, I mean, Mary Jane's a delightful example of someone that I've met that is just a kindred spirit in this industry. And there's so many people that want to lift each other up. And so just keep looking for those. And also what she said about pacing is huge. This is a marathon. This business is really tough and there's always changing regulations. And so it's important to stay light on your feet and not get discouraged by, you know, something shutting down or having to change packaging or someone telling you that you can't do it because of the color of your skin or your gender or your sexuality. It's just, people are going to do that and you just have to let it roll off your back.
Mm-hmm. You kind of just have to be a duck and let it just beat off your back a little bit. But mentorship is so important. It's so crucial, you know, not only for personal development, but like you said, for business development. Katie, what are, or who are some of the leaders or companies in this space that people can reach out to and try to get that mentorship? You know, how, if you're in the LGBTQ community and you're trying to break into cannabis, who are some of the leaders in the space helping to pave the way that people can either go to support, or who can people support in the industry?
Well, obviously us. I mean, we're a queer-run company and we are always happy to talk to people who are interested in moving into the space. Processing is a particularly white male-run industry or facet of the cannabis industry. And so I don't actually know of anyone else that's female or queer that's running a processing outfit, like from material to extracts. But we do have a really amazing ally in Empower. They're also a queer-run, they're not extraction, but they're processing. They make topicals and they're wonderful women and they're super open to communication and helping build each other up. So those are the two I can offer.
That's awesome. And if anyone out there is listening right now and you know of any, please leave a comment in the chat, because we would love to highlight as many companies as possible that are helping us all work in the same direction. Mary Jane, what are your thoughts? Who are some of the companies that are helping to pave the way that we can support?
Well, everyone needs to follow Peak Extracts because they are just the coolest and the best and doing the most amazing stuff, and all of their products are wonderful and I use them myself. And so just wonderful. And also Trista at Empower, and I love everything that they do. I just wanted to sort of like go back to the point about mentorship and what Mike Haze was also saying about, you know, trust funds and this kind of money, this, you know, like corporate money that ends up in the system. I just was interviewing someone who was a young person who didn't have any experience in the industry, and he was a young white guy who was sort of like a tech startup person, and he had a billionaire give him an insane amount of money to start a cannabis company with no experience. And it was just so interesting and sort of infuriating to know that that is the case, and kind of always will be the case. So that is something that we need to work to address with, you know, there are companies that are incubators for social equity programs right now that are really doing their best to address that here in California. There's a wonderful place called Success Centers that I would follow. If you know Angela and Liz at Success Centers, they've started a cannabis branch for Success Centers where they are mentoring people through getting a license and opening up a business in the Bay Area. There's also a company that I really love following here in LA that's the first cannabis company that's owned and operated by trans men. Buck Angel and Leon Mostovoy have a company called Pride Wellness, and they're just a great follow. They're very small, but they are wonderful, and they give back to the Trans Wellness Center here in LA. And then I would just say that, you know, we get to decide with our dollars how we grow the industry as well. So, you know, if you do a little research before you go to the dispensary and make sure that you're buying, you know, at the very least sort of ethically produced, ethically sourced products, that's the first step. And so there are some companies that I think capitalize on pride and, you know, slap a rainbow flag on their products for the month and give sort of a nominal amount back to the community, but that's actually not the case year round. And so you can find companies that are consistently giving back and consistently sort of doing their best to promote voices within the community and be allies and advocates.
I agree. And on that note of supporting businesses year round, I mean, yes, monetary donations are very helpful and they can go a long way, but you know, conscious consumption is something that I think we all in the cannabis industry need to really stop and think about. We stop and think about where does our food come from, but you know, are we now starting to think where does our cannabis come from? Some of us, you know, do a little bit of the research, and then some of us may go into a dispensary and not know about the brands, may depend on the bud tender to give us advice. You know, I know you listed a couple. Katie, are there some other ways that we can, you know, support the LGBTQ businesses year round and not just 1 month out of the year?
Yeah, I think it's important to have conversations with your bud tenders as a consumer and make it clear that that's important to you, because the more people that come in and say, hey, are there any queer brands that I can support? Are there any women-run brands? Are there any brands run by people of color? This is something that we need to create awareness in the marketplace, that this is something that people care about. And so there's that. And then there's also just word of mouth. We've gotten so many good referrals through word of mouth, people using our products and then telling each other, telling their medical providers, normalizing it with their medical providers, and then telling all of their friends. You know, this is something that word of mouth has always been a really powerful influence with the cannabis industry, and it's not going to stop anytime soon.
You know, word of mouth, you can't even pay for that kind of advertising. It's
Right.
the best time. So Mary Jane, are there any final thoughts on how folks can work towards supporting the LGBTQ cannabis community, and not even just the cannabis community, but all LGBTQ founded businesses 12 months out of the year?
I would just say get involved at every level. You know, join local meetups, join NORML, which is the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. Join any local, you know, groups that you can to support and be an ally. You know, really show up. I mean, we're being asked to show up as, you know, straight white people right now more than ever, and it can be a little terrifying, I think, you know, but it's the requirement of us to really do our job right now is to show up with our money and show up with our support and stay quiet and support other voices. And that can be very hard and scary for some people. And I definitely have been trying to learn more about how to do it myself right now. And it's, you know, it's a time for a lot of reflection and investigation into how we can show up. And I think that it's a really cool time in which we are getting to define the future, redefine the future for, you know, cannabis and society. And that's really exciting. And I think cannabis is going to be a big healing tool for society, as we, you know, discovered during COVID that cannabis was deemed an essential. And that's because it truly is. It's a cornerstone of life for many people medicinally and, you know, just as an alternative for other substances. However you choose to use it, it's truly a wonderful thing. So I think that, you know, it's just a really important time to, you know, choose to maybe grow your own. I'm growing my first plant. This is my very first cannabis plant ever, because I realized that I've been writing about it and smoking it for years, but I've never actually grown it. So I was like, well, let me do that while I'm home, stay at home. Like I'll learn about that. And that's actually a right that you should exercise if you have legal access to grow your own. You certainly should. With, you know, we don't want corporations taking it away from us as they have done with so many other things. So
right.
grow your own.
Take back the plan. I agree. You're on your way.
Trying.
I love what both of you have said, you know, and really just to drive it back in, showing up, I think is a big part of the battle. And if you could just get out there, you know, I myself have gone out to a couple protests, you know, just showing up and being that ally, being that support system, and, you know, kind of like what you also said, show up and be quiet and listen, you know, and just take it in and digest what you can do as your own person, and what you can do outward towards your community is monumental in the fight for equality. So thank you both so much for your time. I know Jill, I think she wants to open it back up for a Q&A. So if anyone out there has a couple questions, please leave them in the chat box. We will get to them, and I will turn it back over to Jill. Thank you.
Let me see what we got.
Katie, what's your favorite strain right now?
I am so in love with cherry wine. I can't even start. I mean, it's borderline hemp, but we make a tincture out of it, and it's amazing for gut pain.
Wow, it's borderline hemp, meaning it's like 18% CBD and not much THC at all.
Yeah, I know people that can almost grow it as hemp. It's so low THC.
Wow.
And so when I do need a little extra, I combine it with our THCA tincture. And so I've been like moving towards more CBD, more THCA as opposed to THC.
Awesome. I'm learning, this is a ruderalis autoflowering hybrid. So I have no idea what it's going to be like, but I'm hoping that it's super mellow because I'm sort of a lightweight when it comes to THC. I love high CBD weed. So
nice. What's your favorite strain right now?
I mean, I love all the like citrusy, you know, tangies, and there's a really lovely gelato. Wedding cake has been great lately.
Yeah, I heard wedding cake won awards at MJ Biz.
Yeah, it's so tasty.
Solid strain, yeah. There's one that I just got. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I'm just going to share my favorite strain. It's strawberry kush because it helps me sleep, and get it from my favorite delivery service, Medley. And yeah, it's been helping me with my anxiety and depression and, you know, sleeping. So it's been like my new best friend.
Yeah, it's awesome. The other thing that I've discovered that I didn't really know that much about before sheltering in place was like all day low dose edibles, which is nature's Xanax. I mean, it's helped me. Like I was normally like edible before bed or, you know, before watching a movie or something, but I've been doing like a wake up, you know, 3 to 5 milligram low dose edible, and it's kept me, you know, calm, and it's been wonderful, truly essential.
All right, well, we got our first question from Gary Weinstein. What is the most effective way to research how and whether cannabis is sourced responsibly at a particular dispensary?
I would say ask, and then see if you can find a website that they can point you to for the farm. Most farms like to brag about what they do if they do it well. And so you can root around on the internet and try to find out something about their practices.
And Leafly is, for me, one of the best resources out there. They're just great. They're doing great work as writers, and they're sort of responsibly covering, I think, a lot of the, you know, cannabis. I'm not sure how they do in Oregon, but they do a really great job in California of covering brands and news.
Yeah, I love Leafly.
Mm-hmm.
So another question from Felicia Dawson. Do any of you know of any grants for women wanting to do cannabis in pregnancy that's actually trying to demonstrate safety? If used in a manner closer to ancient traditions.
I'll start.
Yeah.
I got fairly far on a research study with OHSU here in Oregon. It's a research hospital. I used to work there in the neurology department, and we just kept getting hung up with IRB approval and also with the NIH, because any institution that can sponsor such a thing that would have a large enough pool of patients to pull from, this was an oncology study, is very scared of losing their federal funding doing something like this. And so that's what kept, I mean, we put in a year's worth of work, and then we're like, oh, well, they'll lose their funding, so maybe when it gets descheduled. So that's my answer, is that IRB approval is impossible to find, and people are always worried about losing their federal grants.
Yeah, key to, you know, one of the biggest reasons that we need federal legalization is to be able to actually do clinical trials and get data to support all the anecdotal evidence that we have here in this country that it's a medicinal and beneficial plant. But I would recommend checking out Canada. See, I'm Canadian, and I actually haven't been home since they legalized cannabis federally, but I wonder if there's anything happening up there at a level that you could get involved with.
Israel's doing a ton of really amazing work.
And Germany too.
Yep.
Great. Yeah. Another question from Sherry Tarr. Who makes the gelato strain?
Well, it was a strain that was bred in California, but I don't know who the original breeder was. It's available pretty widely now. It's just genetics that have sort of like seeded throughout. I'm not sure who the original breeder was.
Yeah, we've gotten it from a couple farms here in Oregon.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then a question from Gaetano Lardieri. Have you heard about Leafly's advocacy certificate program, and what do you think of it?
I haven't.
But I support everything that Leafly does. I think they're really doing a good job. I mean, there are other cannabis websites out there that are providing information that you could certainly turn to, but I think Leafly really do their best to operate within the parameters of a legal industry, and they are supported by great data. There's a company called Headset. Do you know Headset, Katie? Do you use that at all? Headset I believe was started by the same people who launched Leafly, and it's an analytics company that is providing great data about cannabis out of Seattle. So I don't know. I just think that they're all doing pretty great work over there, and David Downs is an excellent journalist.
Great. And now we have another question from Elizabeth Sheldon. Thank you for sharing and helping others understand how we can be supportive. Oh, it's a comment. It's not, it was a comment in the Q&A tab. But thank you, Elizabeth. So basically she said, thank you for sharing and helping others understand how we can be supportive to those who need to be seen. So yes, thank you for that.
Cool.
Any other questions? All right.
I have a question for you, Katie, actually. How did you learn about extraction?
Through taking chemistry. I did about 10 years of research chemistry and research science work before I got my degree in Chinese medicine. And so I started doing reaction chemistry and isolation extraction chemistry in college. And I did my first illicit cannabis extraction in college using butane. And then I worked with a bunch of different drug trials. I did some MK801 research, which is kind of the ugly older brother of PCP. And then when I worked at OHSU, we did extractions of like green tea, grapeseed oil, that kind of stuff. And so that's how I learned about different solvents and how to do those safely. And that's where I first used CO2.
And that's what you use now is CO2 extraction?
Yeah, we do a little bit of ethanol, but we almost 95% of what we do is CO2. And we have a larger machine now. We started out with a little tiny one named Joan that was in our converted garage. Now we have Ernest. Larger. Of course, the company that sold Ernest to us was very upset that we named him a boy's name. That was a thing, which I thought was really, really funny.
Hilarious.
That's perfect. We have another question from Joe Mode. Do you provide advice or consultations on extractions?
Sure.
For people who are novice about it.
Yeah, I mean, we do consulting. I mean, that said, we've got some pretty proprietary processes, so we won't give away any of our fun stuff, but I'm always happy to have a conversation about chemistry. I mean, most of it is chemistry.
Great. Well, thanks. Any more questions to our attendees in the chat room?
Ooh, I want to answer the question that just popped up. I think that's a great question.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you want me to read it out loud first?
Yes.
Okay. When it comes to making manufacturing cannabis drugs for big pharma, do you agree they will be synthesized and not extractions, etc.?
I don't agree. I think that it's so easy to extract them as opposed to synthesizing them. And then the problem with synthesizing things that are as psychotropic and pharmacologically active as cannabinoids is that you get a lot of enantiomers that are going to interact differently with the receptor. And so an enantiomer is a mirror image of the molecule, which may interact differently. And so when you're manufacturing pharmacological agents or drugs, you have to be really careful that you get the same type of, yes, there is green synthesis, but why not just extract when we have all of this biomass? Most things like EGCG aren't synthesized. You can just extract them quite easily. There are tons of solvents that pull the cannabinoids. Plus, I think there's a lot of utility in the other substances that are in cannabis. Besides the cannabinoids, there's the flavonoids, that kind of thing.
Do you recommend, I'm interested in home extraction. If I actually manage to produce enough cannabis off my plant here, do you have any home extraction techniques that you would recommend? Like, I know about pressing rosin, maybe using a hair straightener with some parchment paper is kind of like a,
It depends on how you feel about chlorophyll. Because you can make butter, which is the oldest way, but that pulls a lot of chlorophyll. The other thing you can do is do what's called a quet, which is a quick wash in ethanol. And I think that's a pretty great way to do it, but you do have to boil off the alcohol, or you have to be willing to drink it, the alcohol, that is.
Oh.
And so you could use Everclear and then get it really, really, really cold and grind up the cannabis, shake it, and then filter it out. And that would get you a pretty clean extraction that would have not that much chlorophyll. It would be a little bit green. Otherwise, just, wheat butter, bubble hash is pretty fun to make at home. Otherwise, the other things that are really good to use to extract are either you need a lot of pressure, so you need like vessels that are welded and safety tested, or they're explosive. So hydrocarbon extractions are not recommended for home use because they go boom.
Yeah.
No, thanks.
Careful of that. Well, great, ladies. This has been wonderful. I appreciate your time today and helping launch our first educational series of Emerald Live. We plan to do 2 events every month. One is a speed networking event. So there's no speakers. It's strictly matching people one-on-one on a video to connect and build relationships. And our next one is July 9th, and it's at 4:20. And that's a Thursday, and we do encourage consumption. And so that's our fun event, our fun networking event. And then on July 21st, we'll have our second edition of this educational series. And the topic of that will be science behind cannabis. And I will be sending a follow-up email to all of the attendees with the details and the speakers. So please mark your calendar, save the date. We'd love to see all of you back on July 9th and July 21st. Again, thank you to our sponsors, Last Prisoners Project, Tribe Tokes, and Cannabis Voters Project. Don't forget to follow us on social media, and thank you so much, everybody. Have a wonderful 4th of July. And
a wonderful July on top of that. Thank you all for being here. Thank you to our panelists so much, and thank you to the audience so much for joining us. Cannot wait to see you next time.
Thank you. Can I give a quick plug for my podcast before I go?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Weed and Grub on Instagram, at Weed and Grub on all socials, and weedandgrub.com if you want to know more. And find our interview with Kate and Katie of Peak Extracts, which we published last year. And since then, we've, I think, published, we're nearing 200 episodes. So there's something for everyone.
Great.
Nice. Congratulations.
Thanks.
Thanks. Well, I can't wait to listen to your podcast. And next time I'm in Oregon, Katie, I'm coming out to Peaks Extracts. I want to tour the facilities.
Oh yeah, come see our robots.
Yeah. All right, thanks everybody. Signing out.
Thanks.
Bye.